Hello, my name is Dhammamegha and welcome to this next edition of the Windhorse Publications podcast. And we've got a real treat today in a conversation that explores with Satyadasa his life, his writing, and the book that we are going to be releasing in the UK in December and in the USA and an audiobook in April next year. And the book is called The Sound of One Hand, A Buddhist Life. And Satyadasa is a very astute observer of his own life and really reflects in this memoir about the process of integration, the process of becoming a Buddhist, the process of reconciling with the fact that he was born with one hand, in this beautifully observed tale. So today I'm going to talk with him about writing the book, about his story, about a 3-generational story of Buddhism coming to the West, and about becoming a Dharma practitioner, and the relational practice, joining a Sangha process of opening up, and the questions of belonging that come with becoming a Buddhist. So I hope you really enjoy the story. I hope you enjoy the podcast, and I hope you'll enjoy the book when you have a chance to read it. Hello, Satyadasa.
Hello, Dhammamegha. Hello.
So today we've got Satyadasa, who is the author of The Sound of One Hand, A Buddhist Life. And Satyadasa is joining me today. Where are you? Where are you today?
I'm in Bethnal Green, East London.
There you go, in the Buddhist village.
On the outskirts of it, yeah.
So Satyadasa you wrote this book called The Sound of One Hand. Let's start with the title of the book. What's that about?
The Sound of One Hand clapping is a well-known Zen koan, at least if you know about koans, it's well-known. And I was born with one hand. And so the title arose as sort of irresistible. The koan is one of those unanswerable questions that the Zen master used to pose to the student, and would flummox them, and they wouldn't be able to really come up with a rational answer. They'd have to reach beyond the question to really give a proper answer to that kind of question. So I thought it's an intriguing idea. I don't use koans myself, but it was too good to resist the pun as well. But, the sound of one hand is also the sound of somebody writing, isn't it? So you write with one hand, and it's a memoir.
So you published this book in February. You self-published it. And
yes,
actually you brought the book to Windhorse Publications, and we said no thank you.
Yeah, twice actually, not you twice, but I did, over the years, yeah.
So actually you and I haven't worked together on this book, which is a bit unusual for me. It's really nice to come in a little bit later in the process. So I'm curious, why did you write this book? We can come back to the themes of it and what it means to write a Buddhist life. But why did you set out to write a book?
I set out to write a book when I was in my early 20s, but I didn't have enough to actually write about. I just had this feeling that I could write. It was a sort of an assumption which was actually undermined when many years later I did feel like I had something to write, and I tried to write it. As I was coming up to 40, I started to write a novel first, but it was thinly disguised autobiography, and I got into all kinds of technical problems with writing novels and started to read books about how to write a novel, and then I was doomed. So I gave all the novel up, and I thought, let's just write a memoir. This is what's needed. Yeah, so I set about doing that, and it took me quite a few years, actually. I really just went away on solitary retreat every so often, came back and then wrote in my local cafe when I had time. And I was just I was learning to write. That was part of the enjoyment of the experience. But really, I just learned to tell things simply and well. And, I found that was really hard.
you've had experience as a writer. You were a journalist on the crime.
Yeah, I was a journalist.
Yeah.
I was a journalist at the courts. Yeah, the court. I was a court reporter. So I learned a more pithy style from journalism, but it didn't really help me when it came to personal writing. You know, I started writing, and it was quite a lot of what I would write would be me telling the imagined reader what I thought about life, or the subject in question, and or there'd be a few nice sort of anecdotes from my life that I could remember, but really it was a bit too it wasn't quite going to really be interesting. Actually, it's fairly boring. All my thoughts and opinions, once I'd got them out on the page, I realized they were a bit dull. So I started to write about my hand at a certain point. I mean, I did include that originally, but then when I started to write about having been born with one hand, I thought, that's the theme to start on for any tale about myself, which might sound obvious to now that I've written a book about it, but I didn't intend to write a book about having one hand. I mean, it's not about having one hand, but it is as well.
So you're not particularly a famous person. Well, not yet, anyway. So what is it about your life and your story that you wanted to communicate, and also that you thought would be of interest or of value to a reader?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons it's hard to get published, because I'm not famous. I don't have a big Twitter following, and nothing absolutely exceptional has happened in my life. But the writing process, I mean, I just felt like I had something to communicate, and that my main interest was in the writing and getting into that. So I did have in my mind, of course, somebody would be listening and reading my work. Usually that was sort of me. I had to satisfy myself about that. But I guess it's an instinct more than a kind of sense of I want to tell people about this or that. That is what emerged through the process of writing, discovering, what it is. Writing is a creative process. You can start off with the idea that your life is something that's happened, and that your job is to write it down. It's already happened. It just hasn't been written down yet. But that's actually quite, that's not what it's like. You are creating and dwelling on and thinking about your life, and then trying to portray it. It's all a creative act. And so you discover what it is that you want to say when you've done the job, really. So I didn't start off with a very clear idea, but I did start off thinking that there is a story that I think people can relate to, and it obviously has to do with one of the main things is that I am a part of a Buddhist community and part of a Buddhist order now, and there's a journey that I've seen many people go on, and I was trying to portray my journey through that in a way that allowed people to see that.
Mm. And you've certainly been successful in that. I mean, some people who are listening to this may have already read your book, and some may not. But your writing is deeply, deeply engaging, and partly because you're such an astute observer of both yourself and people around you, and you're very, very precise and very honest in your writing in a way that's often entertaining, in the sense that it's very, very engaging. I remember right at the beginning, one of the early sentences you say, my grandfather was interested in, I can't remember the wording of it exactly, like, in the Taoism, Buddhism, and in all such things, and it bored your mum to tears. I just thought it was so great. You take this very weighty, serious thing, and then, of course, we're in the realm where for some people that's just dull and boring, as it is for some of your friends down the pub when you get really involved in Buddhism.
Absolutely. I mean, the stories that I had to tell about, my mum and her father, my grandfather, those things distillations of my memories from childhood and things my mother's told me. But everybody has them. We all have those in our minds of things that have happened in childhood. Such an amazing time to reflect on. But then you have to work hard to find the way that you need. Well, I had to work hard to find the way that I needed to communicate that, be it using pithiness, humor, poignancy of life, and or sort of maybe precise, thoughtful things as well. So it's a mix, isn't it? And I'm delighted that so many people seem to have been able to sort of walk alongside my life and have found points of connection with it. Yeah.
Mm. So maybe it could be good to talk about some of the themes in the book. It's all kind of captured in a way in the title and the subtitle. So it's The Sound of One Hand, A Buddhist Life. And one way you could look at your story is a story of 3 generations of Buddhism or the Dharma coming to the West. And the first of those generations was your grandfather's generation. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about you call him your grandpa.
My grandpa, yeah. Well, grandpa was a big influence on my early life, but in a way, writing the book has made him more of an influence on my life in that strange way that the more you kind of think about a person, the more alive they become to you, the more resonances you can find. And he was born before just before the First World War, actually, and he was an optician in Leigh-on-Sea, and then in Ilford, East London. So he was an optician, and after the war there was a period when it became much more common to read books on. There's Madame Blavatsky was the famous one, wasn't it? Isis Unveiled, and then there was books about Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, the Upanishads, and various Eastern religions. He was to begin with, he was a rationalist. He would have called himself, writing for the Rationalist magazine, and then he started to open up to Eastern ideas, and clearly he was very inspired by that. He lived with, in a suburban house in Cheam, and he started to have philosophy groups, and then started to teach people to meditate by the late 70s, I think. He himself learned to meditate. But he was a rather particular character. He was very controlling. He was domestically rather unbending, and he in a way he inflicted philosophy, Eastern philosophy, religion on my mother and her brother, and kind of controlled the house with his need to have some quiet in the afternoon so he could write poetry and study and things. So, and it was actually quite extreme in some ways. He was obsessive, really. Yeah. But he had this love for it, and he started to write a book about it. And many years later, I discovered, and this was after I'd been involved in Buddhism for some time, and I had actually become a mitra in the Triratna Sangha. I went home one day, and I went home rather to see my grandma, who I call Nana, and she was living. My grandpa had died by this time. She was still living in the same place, and I said, I'm living in the London Buddhist Centre now, Nana. And I was living in a community in the London Buddhist Centre, and she said, "Oh yes, how is Sangharakshita?" Sangharakshita, and Sangharakshita obviously being the kind of founder of the Triratna order, and I'd been reading his books by that point and thinking about him. I'd even met him, I think, but I couldn't believe that my nana had actually said this, and it transpired that my grandpa had actually invited Sangharakshita to their house when in the 1960s, 1964, I think, before he'd founded the Western Buddhist order. And my mum had met him when my mum was a teenager, and my nana had met him, and my whole family had met him on that side. And he gave a talk at their house. So that was a discovery I made. And he had given, I had, after he died, I got some of his books, and that was what set me going on the Buddhist path. I got some books about Zen, which I took to university with me. So, he didn't directly teach me Buddhism. He did try to teach me meditation once. I wasn't interested. But he's a very eccentric character. He used to hold forth with a cigar and kind of pontificate on all kinds of deep subjects, while the rest of the family was sort of bemused or actively not interested, in the case of my mum. Yeah.
You tell a great story about discussions at the kitchen table about whether or not the table really existed from this lovely child's perspective of trying to get a handle on what's at stake.
Yeah, I mean, if it did intrigue me. I had a really retentive mind, so I would remember all kinds of discussions that we had from previous occasions, and then sort of bring them back up at the breakfast table, because I thought it was really interesting to discuss, if the breakfast table was there, if we all went into the lounge, was the breakfast table still there, and in whose mind, how could you say that it was there if nobody was seeing it, kind of stuff that doesn't really help much, but it's interesting. Yeah.
One of the things I loved about your book was that, I don't know about you, but for those of us who are, let's say, convert Buddhists, there's this enormous, maybe perhaps lifelong process of trying to integrate the Dharma with our whatever cultural conditioning, whatever values and whatever personalities we have. There's a sort of view of Buddhism as something elsewhere, as something idealistic, as something maybe renunciate. Maybe it looks like a monk or a nun, or maybe it looks like just sitting quietly somewhere. And I think one of the things that's so successful about your book is this telling the story of one person's process of integrating, the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, those practices, a Sangha, and like your own personhood, your history, your impulses. Wonder if you can say a little bit about, or maybe, looking back at writing the book, how that thread developed for you.
Yeah, I mean, going back to my grandfather, in some ways, I remember when he died, he had his body put on. He didn't do it, obviously. We brought his body back and put it on his desk, and surrounded by his books on Dharma, his books on Buddhism, and all kinds of other things. And it was in his study. And I remember seeing him and really being quite shocked. It was the first dead body I'd seen. And thinking about all his learning and all the kind of academic pursuits that he'd made, and his efforts at meditation. But it was all done without any community, without any teacher. The idea was that you very much were your own kind of person, your own teacher. It was a kind of weakness to be part of a group. Unless you were at the top of the group, which he ended up being. And I really thought, I don't want to end up somehow like him, marooned in ideas and thoughts, and without, there was some, even at the age of 18, I could see that there was something that was not explored in terms of, the emotional life and other aspects of him. Maybe he did. Of course, I can't say I didn't. I only knew him to that age and never got to speak to him as an adult in a way. But that's what struck me. And when I came to find a Sangha, which is in a later period in the development of Buddhism in this country, there are now lots of Sanghas, and it's a totally different arena to the one my grandfather had. And in a way, we should sort of thank those early people who brought, who did start to bring Dharma into the culture here. But when I found a Sangha, then I immediately saw that this was a very different kind of thing, completely different actually from what he was doing. There were people, firstly it's relational, and your whole life, in a way, that was the encouragement. It was to be brought in. It wasn't just about meditation experiences, going on maybe the odd retreat, which my grandfather never went on a retreat. It was about bringing your whole self to the table, if you like. And that was tremendously exciting to me, on the back of quite a strong meditation experience and a retreat experience, which is very often the way that people first become really involved in Dharma practice. So on the back of that, I was then hearing about all this presentation that really we need to try to bring our whole selves, in a way, into relationship with this thing we call the Dharma or Buddhism. It's a bit abstract, but there was this Sangha there. And my first impression was, this is absolutely extraordinary. This is something that is unprecedented in my life. Just because my grandfather knew about Buddhism, that didn't make any difference at all. There was nothing in my cultural background to suggest that at one point in my life I was going to have this real opening of the heart or the imagination, a real feeling that there's something so much more about life. Growing up in South London, growing up in a middle class, very happy little family, in a culture which didn't really contain any reference to that, in a culture which didn't even pose any decent questions. You talk about death, and that would be there'd be nothing. It's nothing. There wouldn't be any way forward on some of the discussions about what was most important in life. That's at least what I found. It was all either very academic or abstract. I studied a bit of philosophy. But when I came to the Sangha, that was really something. That was that opening up. And I've seen so many people, of course, friends and others who've been through that. And I really wanted to begin by describing that. Then, as you say, well, I moved into a community. I started going on lots more retreats. My girlfriend left me because I was doing that. And I moved into an all-men's community at the Buddhist Center in Bethnal Green, where I still live. I live with my wife now, just around the corner. But for that, I lived there for quite a lot of my 20s. Yeah, but then, despite this sort of vision and this sense of life opening up and a sense of there being more than one can imagine, as is portended by the Buddhist tradition and all this wonderful inspiration that flows through the Buddhist tradition, then I did go on the path of bringing myself to the table, in a way, with the help of friends and with the help of others. And there was conflict in my life then. So after a few years of living in the Buddhist center, I actually felt more miserable than when I moved in. And I had expected to kind of get steadily better and for my mind to steadily be full of more and more, I don't know, joy, and that people would notice it anyway. But no, that didn't happen. And one of the things that started to happen was I realized that, a lot of the things that my life had prepared me for, such as romance and all the career and all that kind of stuff, was still really, really important to me, even though I was also very drawn to Buddhist practice and inspired by that. I was equally keen on fulfilling a lot of other things, we can call them, conditionings from my life and upbringing, but they were important to me. I wanted romance. I didn't really see where that fitted into the Buddhist scheme of things. And that worried me, that actually kind of like, whoa, and money, sex, let's get down to it. It's these things were, where does that fit in? Buddhism is a in a way, it's a renunciate path, isn't it? It's, at least it seems to be. You seem to have to sort of give up things. And I'd hardly started on some of those things. So, yeah.
Yeah. But listening to you speak like this, I'm kind of just aware of so many echoes in a way with the establishment of Triratna, this particular Sangha, that we happen to share this Sangha. We don't happen to, we share this Sangha. But, the sort of Sangharakshita's response to the Dharma himself, and trying to find a Sangha, trying to find companions, trying to find a way of integrating his own, also his other loves, let's say, poetry and arts, for example, into a Dharma life. Like, that was a whole process across his life. And you speaking about trying to integrate, a wish for a family life, a wish for work that's not just packing cans in a in a whole food shop, or moving things around. Like, you had ambition, quite a lot of ambition. Maybe you still do. I mean, I wonder whether you say now, you said you got a bit more miserable over time as these, perhaps the dimensions of your life came more into conflict as you were trying to integrate them. Is there any resolution of that in the book?
Well, there is. But it's good to stay with the lack of resolution, isn't it, as well? And I think there's something about persisting with one's unintegratedness as well. I think, like, when I was in my 20s, I heard this idea, we need to be integrated practitioners, and that is right. But the way my mind picked that up was, quite quickly, I'm going to have to stop doing some of the things that I actually like doing. And, maybe it'd take a few years or whatever, but I will eventually become more packaged, like I'm supposed to be packaged or something. Now, but the actual path of integration is, of course, much more messy than that. It doesn't go according to one's own sense of what's, how it should go. I became very doubtful. I became doubtful about, is this the right community for me? You're quite right. This was Sangharakshita's sort of genius in a way, is to realize that one had to bring oneself, into the whole picture through communication, through study, through, perseverance. But it isn't easy. And as a process, it led me into quite a lot of doubt at certain points, and doubt being a kind of a stuckness, a sense of, well, I'm not really worthy of being a Buddhist. Then I'd ask for ordination, and people were picking up on things like, well, that I was divided in my feelings. I couldn't honestly express my love of the three jewels. I couldn't really easily say I love doing pujas or worship, or that I felt, but I did get something out of these, and yet I was stuck because I also didn't want to commit my life to something that I wasn't really fully behind. So there's something to be said in retrospect for kind of persisting with one's lack of integration, and kind of just being truthful to what I did like. Of course, that in itself is not always easy to do, because you have a lot of fantasies, don't you, about life that aren't really achievable anyway. But so I did persist, and I had to leave. That's part of the journey of the book, is that I had to kind of put down some of my. I had to stop being. I was requested ordination, so I unrequested it. I left the London Buddhist Centre. I left the community after about 6 years, and I didn't kind of break all ties, but I had certainly got into some difficulties with some people. I was sort of, well, this either they were superior to me, or they were just, or I would judge them. I would judge them to be superior, or I judged them to be inferior, or I judged it to all be a mess, So I was in that kind of judging kind of mode, not all the time. I mean, I had good times. It wasn't like I was always miserable, but that became persistent. So I needed to leave, and that was hard. Leaving a kind of spiritual community where you feel that something there expresses something so important, and yet you have to leave. Well, that's what I felt. So I did, and the journey back, in a way, was from that point of leaving, was to go, and I moved in with my girlfriend at that time, who's now my wife, and came back in a different way. It took probably another 7 or 8 years from that point before I was ordained, and then that process of integration just carries on. Of course, some of the more urgent things that I thought about when I was 25 no longer apply. Now I'm, in my late 40s. But yeah.
I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why this book is so incredibly helpful. I was chatting actually to Kshantikara the other day, who's a sort of young person's coordinator, and he's actively encouraging everybody to read it. And I think it's exactly because, in the first flash of that, I don't know, falling in love with the Dharma or having these really big experiences with meditation or this feeling of belonging. I mean, so many retreats I've been on, you say people saying, well, actually, I feel somehow at home for the first time in my life. And as you say, there's this sort of magic of the possibility of communication that's often not possible in other places. And yet, it's not a straight line we keep having to bring all of the dimensions of ourselves into it. So he's sort of saying, like, read this book because this will give you a much better sense of what might happen than a series of sort of almost technical terms about, oh, well, and then you'll become more integrated. Well, what does that look like? What does that feel like?
Yes, I've been so happy that people have related it in that way. One of the phrases you said then was at home. That feeling of feeling almost a coming home when one discovers the Sangha, a sense of belonging. And if I could say, one word, what the book is about, in a way, it's about belonging, or the search or the struggle for belonging. And of course, that's a complex issue. And the Sangha would be the first place where I kind of understood what was missing in my life previously. Well, this goes back to the title, or the having one hand is something that I've missed. Maybe we can talk about the hand, but that feeling that this, the feeling of not belonging, not belonging to. It's almost being kind of like in a culture that can really meet. I've thought about this. Can really meet people in their totality. We're no longer really connected to the land. Most of us, we're no longer in real communities. We're in abstract communities where we're not. We get very invested in our identities in all sorts of ways, but that is often just a poor proxy for really belonging. And of course, then we don't really belong to the cosmos, or we have a feeling of disconnection from nature, or the wider sense of what life is, and the gods and the myths. We're not really connected to all these things, and yet you come to a Sangha, and there suddenly that all comes to life again. That maybe I really am connected. Maybe this is, or maybe it's not. We're not in this nihilistic, bleak sort of thing where we're all just going to die and that's it. And maybe there's more to it, and then you find out that there is more to it, and there's far more to it than you can even imagine. But then there's also, you have to go ourselves. Is this belonging to this group? Is that what belonging means? Is it belonging to a group, belonging to a Buddhist order, and all the shenanigans that can go on in any order or group or anything? How do you navigate all of that? And there's an element of us which doesn't belong. The Dharma points beyond. It doesn't point to belonging to an order or having a name or even calling yourself a Buddhist. It points beyond that. And that's, in a way, I got to a kind of resolution, where I just felt happy and grateful that I had come across this wonderful thing. And I do go into it in the book in terms of the difficulties that this order has faced, and the criticisms of the whole order and the founder and everyone in between. So I go into that, but I ended up feeling very grateful and glad that this had been presented to me, and this was, I could flow along. I could kind of give up doubt. I could just flow along with what I found in this life of great value. I don't regard myself as having even begun really in terms of Dharma practice in many ways, but yeah. So I just thought this is a gift, and I managed to not, to see the Sangha, the community, in a way, not to see through it to this greater thing. This is what it's really about. There's all the politics of life that come to almost crowd out that real inspiration, which we all start with in a way. So I found my way back to that inspiration, but maybe with a somewhat more realistic sense of life in general. Yeah, when you're young and you start the Dharma practice, you have to also just grow up in an ordinary sense as well. You kind of got to go through all one's ordinary growing up things, disappointments that everybody faces, whether you're a Dharma practitioner or not.
So let's come back to the hand and the place of the hand in belonging, in finding your belonging.
Yeah. I was born with a congenital birth defect. My mum was terribly affected by this. It was 1974. There wasn't any great support structure for this, as there is now. But it's obviously having, when you give birth to a child, you check the fingers and toes, don't you? And that's such a poignant thing. So. Yeah, that was difficult. I of course didn't really realize how difficult that was till actually I was an adult. Before I probably was in my 30s before I really started to imagine what that was like. But I grew up a happy little boy, and you just deal with life as you find it. And I had one hand, and my parents would help me with finding practical solutions to things. And in a way, I wasn't missing a hand because I never had one to miss. But there was a point where I became conscious of the difficulty of this, and the difficulty wasn't to do with, learning to ride my bike or tie up my shoes, etc., or cutlery, which is the main thing that they always focus on. The difficulty was social. The difficulty was feeling awkward, feeling different. And then I had a period when that was pointed out to me in rather, unkind terms by some of my peers at school. And so there was a definite moment when I realized this is a problem that isn't going away. It's a problem with no solution on the horizon. It's something I'm stuck with. And that feeling of being stuck, I think, is one of the things that sort of persisted with me right through my ordination process, that feeling of doubt about myself, of feeling stuck. And I could easily kind of echo back to this early, when I was 7 or 8, feeling of heaviness. This thing has settled on me. I've got to just, it's dukkha, isn't it? It would say in Buddhism, it's a sort of, my life's pretty good. The rest of my body's great. And I just want to get on, like everybody just wants to get on. But I've got this visible thing, and people are teasing or picking on me on as a result of it. So that affected me, and I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to direct attention away from it, and I think probably for the first 3 decades of my life, I wanted to direct attention to some other facet of my personality, something that I could really say, oh, I am very academically great, or I was quite good. I was quite sporty. I was a bit of an all-rounder. So I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to for that to be the thing that people noticed. But of course, is obvious. So people are going to notice it. I didn't really want people to sort of say, how do you feel about that? Occasionally people would ask me questions, but I gave off a vibe, I think, I was like, I'm fine. No, nothing to see here. Yeah. So yeah, I've got on one hand. Yeah, no problem. That was the healthy, in a way, response that got me through my childhood. But didn't really work. Also, when I was in my late 20s, I'd been practicing meditation and awareness for quite a number of years by then. And I saw a guy on the tube one day, and he had an arm just like mine, and I just wanted to get away from him. I just thought, I hope he doesn't spot me. He probably spotted me the instant he got on the tube, because it's quite easy to spot someone with a difference. You always spot it, but you politely pretend you haven't. And then I thought, why am I feeling that? Why is that? So I ended up spending a couple of years in investigating that more. I got a prosthetic and saw what that was like. Didn't really like that. I also went on a camp for children with similar disabilities. All of us and all the adult helpers, everybody on the camp, activity weeks, did 2 of them, and everybody had the same thing, or no hands. That was incredibly moving, and that was the moment when I really thought, there's some healing to do here, and in a way that was incredibly healing, being mirrored and seeing children, fumbling over their cutlery and doing things in the way that I do. I noticed, for example, my tendency to rush things because I don't want to make an allowance for myself. I just want to rush to get things done by the shortest cut, which often leads to things being spilt or something. And so and how does that relate to, in a way, the whole thing, the belonging? I guess there is, for all of us, I'm just imagining there's something in all of us that we, in a way, try to direct attention away from, or we feel vulnerable about. It might not be physical or visible. It might be just in our sense of who we are and our background or our family origin or whatever. But there's probably always some area of consciousness, let's say, that is holding us back or is not brought out. And so often it's the bringing out of that is the really important thing, and it's the bit that you don't want to acknowledge, that then turns into the bit that is the precious bit. It's not everything about you, of course. We're multifaceted, so part of the contradiction of writing a story about your life is that it's true. And then I had to explore say, for example, the question of, did I become a Buddhist because I had this suffering point in my life of having one hand? And was that what drove me to the Dharma? Or unless I resisted that strenuously for a number of years, and then I embraced that, and then I realized it's also not really true as well. It's not fully true. My grandfather, he was on that path, and I am his grandson, and maybe that's more the reason. Maybe there's other reasons that I haven't got a clue about. And so there's many stories there, but that story of feeling that vulnerability and meditation really helped me grow. And then there was these other things that I had to do as well, to do with becoming more aware of my inner awkwardness and my feeling of exposure that comes with having one hand. Still there, it's still kind of with me. I can spot it. Yeah, so I guess writing the book has been very valuable to me, in the sense that saying, isn't there, by some psychologist, I can't remember, if you don't learn to tell the story of your life, the story is going to tell you. So we often in Tree Rat and we tell life stories, and it's such a precious thing to do, to give a reflective space to really dwelling on your life, not in a kind of navel gazing way, but just telling the story of your life to other people, or maybe in a book. But that gives you a kind of reflective distance, and it's a precious thing to be able to devote time to that and really really, really, explore your life, and then it changes. So, and I think through the 8 or 9 years that I was slowly, steadily grafting away at writing my story, I changed a lot as a result of actually doing that.
And you now are a father. You're now at the start of a next generational turn.
Yes. We, my wife and I, adopted a little boy this year, and that's been interesting, knackering, joyful, really joyful. And of course, it's again brought on another layer of thinking about my own parents and what parents in general do for children, and the kind of the difficulties of all that. It's another whole layer. I don't get so much time to meditate or go on retreats at the moment, but I get up and sometimes I can sit in my armchair, and then Thomas gets up and he'll come and sit in my lap. He's 5 years old and was chanting a mantra, and I chant it for a while and then I stop, and he says, "Is it finished?" I said, "Yes, it's finished now." I don't know what he makes of it all. He says, "When am I going to get a Buddhist name?" But so, yeah, that's what I'm doing. It's a very, wonderful thing. I'm looking forward to the publication of my book with Windhorse.
It's so lovely. It's so lovely to hear you speaking about the writing and the process for you. I mean, the book itself is a really wonderful piece of storytelling, and it you've been talking a little bit about the part of your defense, let's say, of being, really smart, really funny, really astute observer, pointing the light onto your capacities and wanting to exercise those capacities, and writing is part of that exercise of capacities, and it's really beautifully done. And then this sort of really tender thread of the part that you show, that you haven't wanted to be seen, but you show it in the book, and you see the beauty in that, particularly that camp you were talking about, with kids and adults with similar sort of disabilities. It's a really beautiful part of the writing where you, I sort of felt like an exhalation when I read that somehow. I was like, oh, okay. there's that too, which has kind of come to rest somehow. Very, very beautiful. And I have no doubt that the book will not only inspire, but also, I think, give other people confidence that this is part of the process. Like our confusions and doubts aren't separate from the process. They very much are part of the process of integration and resolution. So, I think it's really astute in that way. So I'm really, really pleased we're publishing it. It's going to come out in the UK. We're basically just doing another reprint of your book, so that we don't run out of books to sell between us. So that'll come out in mid-December. And then you're going to be doing an audiobook, which is the first time we're actually coordinating an audiobook from our side. So that's very exciting. And the audio,
that is very exciting.
I know, yeah. I'm looking forward to it. And so the audiobook and the USA release will be in April 2023. So, yeah. Is there anything you want to say about what you hope the book will do out there in the world?
I've been very pleased with just, and delighted. People have come up to me with a big smile on their face, saying they feel they know me really well. And obviously I didn't write it so that people know me really well, but I wrote it to try to show a story, and through that to allow people to kind of walk alongside that story. And the beautiful thing about memoir is that you read a memoir and somehow you are living that life, and you're it's telling you something about your life as well at the same time. And it's that ability that we all have to connect with each other, and yet we're so sort of unique, and yet there is this utter connection that we have with each other. I read a book recently about surfing, a surfing journey called Barbarian Days, and I've never surfed in my life, but I just got right into that whole world and his interior world, and he told it very honestly at times as well. So that's what I hope. I hope people enjoy it.
Well, thank you, Satyadasa, for writing the book and for, bringing yourself so fully into that story. And as you say, making space for that empathy. I have no doubt at all that everyone who reads it will enjoy it and will accompany you in that path of yours. Thank you so much. We'll see you with the various launches and releases, and wish you all the best with it.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Satyadasa. That is the last of our podcast episodes for this year. I hope you've enjoyed them. I hope you continue to listen to them and share them with your friends. And more than that, I hope that you have a really good end of year, festive season period. I know that it's not always that easy over Christmas time and New Year's time. So I hope you take care of yourselves and others around you, and that you continue to be able to draw on the resources of mindfulness and compassion. And I very much look forward to seeing you next year. We've got some very exciting podcast episodes coming up. At the moment, in pencil, we have the possibility of a conversation with Visantara about the book that we're about to release of his in December, much awaited, a new edition of Meeting the Buddhas. And then we'll be having a conversation with Nagabodhi, who's just finished writing a biography of his friend and teacher, founder of the Triratna Buddhist movement, a book called Sangharakshita, The Boy, the Monk, the Man. So we've got some great episodes coming up. See you in the new year. Take care. Windhorse Publications is part of the Triratna Buddhist community, and this podcast is sponsored by Future Dharma Fund, a Buddhist fundraising charity which helps fund Dharma projects across the world, including ours. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider donating to them to help them fund current and future projects like ours. You can find out more about Windhorse Publications by going to our website.